Okay. My name's Andrew Hatfield. I'm from Red Hat. I'm the practice lead for cloud storage and big data in ANZ. Apologies, this was 16 by 9, but because I've only got VGA and DisplayPort, it's a bit shrunk. So, going to be speaking about CephFS and why it's now fully awesome. And that's a very technical term, I know, and marketing did not sign off on it. So, very quickly, what is Ceph? Ceph is a storage system, and underlying that there's an object store called Rados, and then we have some interfaces. There's block with RBD, Rados block device. There's object, which is S3, and there's Swift, which is RGW, or Rados gateway. And now there's CephFS, which is a file system. So what is CephFS? So it's a POSIX compatible distributed file system for file-based workloads. And it's a managed and hierarchical workspace. And a great use case for it is Manila, right? So who has not heard of Manila in OpenStack? I've mentioned it twice now, so no hands should be up. Excellent. All right, so some cool things about what CephFS does is that we have coherent caching across the entire distributed file system. So something that one client does, the other client sees it pretty quickly, synchronous updates, and all data and metadata is stored in Rados, and the clients access the Rados component of Ceph directly. So the metadata is not in the data path, so we can scale quite efficiently. So in terms of the CephFS architecture, we have this concept of an MDS, or metadata service. It doesn't host any of the storage itself, and it serves as a cache for the metadata. And we use Crush and Rados to manage the file and metadata placement. And so Crush, for those who aren't familiar, is a rule set that defines the physical domain failures in your environment as they reflect to your storage cluster. So if you have a power circuit or a rack or a switch or a network port go down, Ceph will continue to work. So it's designed to work expecting failure to be a common state, not suddenly work out how to handle it when something goes wrong. Right, so what is Ceph good for? All right, other than starry-eyed guitar players. All right, so it's really good for storage as a service, OpenStack Manila, which I'll talk about in a second, high-performance computing. There's a lot of customers and users in the community that are using it for research or financial transactions, and metadata-intensive workloads. So typically, file systems, and especially distributed file systems, suffer from metadata updates, and this is a strength for CephFS. Right? So what is OpenStack Manila? So we understand that we have Cinder, we have Glance for block and image repositories, we've got Swift and S3 for object, and so the missing component from a persistence perspective was file. So OpenStack Manila is a way for consumers in an OpenStack cloud to have file as a service. All right, there's a number of drivers for that. There's proprietary, which we don't want. There's CephFS, and there's a more generic NFS type. And I'll talk about the second two a bit more. But basically, it enables either through Horizon or the API for tenants or projects to go and create and consume file shares and attach them to their VMs. So why CephFS for Manila, right? So Ceph is the most widely used storage system for OpenStack. Typically, it's somewhere between 60 and 70% of respondents to the user survey are using Ceph, and it's almost half of that is the next one down. And we get a similar sort of response from a CephFS and Manila perspective, right? So for those customers and users that are already using Ceph, it makes a lot of sense. So they've already got this storage system that works really well for them. It also does file. Let's do that as well. So I've got one storage product for everything. All right? So some pretty graphics. It's in the wild. It works. I can go and create a share. I can attach it to my VM, and then I can get a bit more detail. The IP address is the MDS. I saw someone commenting earlier that they finally saw a slide with an IP address in it. Personally, I think we should just use service names, but we've got an IP address. We can know where we're talking. There's the volume. We know its size, and it's using CephFS. So it works. So in terms of the CephFS native driver, there's a couple of different ways that we can do this. Right? So one of the drawbacks here is that it doesn't auto-mount the share, but the typical way in which we configure our storage in Ceph, we create some volumes and some keys, and we share them. Right? The downside is that the client talks directly to the storage network. Now, in some environments, that may not be a problem. In many, it is. So not necessarily a solution for every situation. We could use the CephFS NFS driver using Ganesha, right? So we've now got something in between that serves something that's a bit more generic. So or Linux systems that don't have up-to-date CephFS drivers can also consume this, or for those other systems that you're virtualizing as well. Now there's some pros and cons here. We've now separated our storage network and our public network, but potentially this is placing a lot of load on our controller systems, right? It's also potentially a single point of failure. So we also need to take into consideration how we're going to make that highly available. Who loves Pacemaker and CoroSync? Well, yes, it would be you. All right. Sorry, Tim. So, there's pros and cons. So that's some things that work today. What we're working towards going for, though, however, and for those of you that were in the panel just before, we're vigorously investigating running a Ceph cluster hosted by Kubernetes so that we can have co-resident monitors and OSDs together, and we can have Ganesha run, and that way we also have service separation between the different shares, right? And Kubernetes handles the placement and availability. So, we now know CephFS is fully awesome. I know this was really quick, and when I practiced it, it took me 5 minutes, so I must have spoken a bit slower. But the good thing is that this is something that works today, right? There's users out in the community that are using CephFS for Manila. Interestingly, it started as a way for proprietary vendors to try and get a bit more life out of their big fridges that they try and sell you. And the community have said, you know what, we don't want that. So we're going to go down the Ceph path. And so there's been a couple of iterations around how we're going to do that. And I think the future looks really bright around containers running everything, right? So that's pretty cool. So if you've got any questions, Greg and Patrick are the ones you want us to talk to, not me. I just look really pretty. But no, seriously, we're around throughout the week. Please come and see us. Thanks.